What is your biggest business, life, or any other lesson you've learned from podcasts and podcasting? Recorded live at Podcast Movement 2015. Welcome to the Audacity to Podcast, episode 230. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Audacity to Podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and this is the award-winning how-to podcast about podcasting. It's where I give you the guts and teach you the tools to launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. I'm at Podcast Movement 2015 right now, and this is an amazing event. You can probably hear some of the background noise as I'm recording this live from the Buzzsprout booth. Big thanks to the team from Buzzsprout for providing this booth. If you want to check them out, go to the audacitytopodcast.com/Buzzsprout. And I'm asking this question because I love engaging with the people at conferences and events like this. I had to rip myself away from some great conversations to record this podcast, but I want the answer to this question. What is the biggest life lesson, business lesson, or any other kind of lesson that you have learned from listening to podcasts or from recording podcasts yourself? It could be a lesson in your personal life. Like maybe you learned how to overcome a fear of speaking to people. Maybe you learned how to introduce yourself to people better. Maybe it helped your marriage or helped your friendships or anything like that. Maybe it's a business lesson, like you learned how to launch a business or maintain a business, market your business, anything like that. There are a lot of things, and you'd be surprised what we learn in this industry. So there are a lot of things that we can learn from being podcasters and, of course, from listening to podcasts. So I'm really excited about the responses that will be shared from everyone who will be sharing during this episode that's being recorded live from Podcast Movement. So people will be coming and going. And I am excited to talk to all of these people. If you've never been to Podcast Movement, please make it to Podcast Movement. Check it out at podcastmovement.com. And the next one is going to be in July 2016 in Chicago. I'm looking forward to being there. Maybe I'll be speaking again. We'll find out. But we have our first guest, the man who introduced me in Podcast Movement. He introduced my own session. And Joel from the ReLaunch podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Daniel, you're going to have to do me a favor and be a speaker because I need to go to Podcast Movement 2016, and hopefully I'll be invited on as a speaker. But if not, I will be your built-in announcer. How about that?
Awesome.
Introducer.
So, Joel, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from this?
Okay, now that is a great question. One of the biggest lessons I think that I've learned from podcasting is that podcasting is the new networking. And here's what I mean by that. And I've been podcasting for, years. And anytime I want to meet a new person, it might be an author, it might be an athlete, an actor. What would I do? I would call them or email them and just simply invite them on my show. And 9 times out of 10, people say, of course I'll be on your show. And then instantly we're, immediately connected as friends. We'll have a nice 15, 20, 30-minute interview. And then after the interview, well, Daniel, you're a podcaster. You know what happens. We stick on the phone for an extra 2, 3, 4 minutes. And all of a sudden, it's like we're, best friends, like we've known each other forever.
Do you feel like you wouldn't have had these opportunities or that they would have turned you down if you didn't have a podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question, too. I don't really have the answer to that question. However, since I do have a podcast and we've experienced some success with the ReLaunch Show, that it gives me a built-in reason to get in touch with people and just an easy way to invite them into a relationship.
Yeah, and especially with your show, with the ReLaunch Show, which I've been on before, and I'll have a link to that in the notes for this session, number 230. One of the great things about your show is that the way that you open up the conversation with people and connect with people on a very deep personal level, then it's very easy to understand how then you build a friendship with them afterward. And the relationship then that you're building with your audience too through your show.
Well, one of the things that I've thought for a long, long time is that people they want to tell their story. I mean, they want to tell their real story, what moves them, what they've experienced in their past, and what they've learned from. And as a podcaster, what I strongly believe is it's my responsibility as a host to create that safe space for them so that they can tell and they can share and they can open the door and let me as a host in, and also our listening audience. And what I've also found is that when a person really is able to share, the deeper parts of themselves, even the parts that they're not proud of, like you did on our show, well, that makes the connection just all the more real and intimate. And so after the interview, what I hear a lot is, gosh, I've never told anyone that story before, and that is the biggest compliment that I can get as a host, and it just strengthens and deepens the relationship that we've already started building.
So tell us, where can we get your show?
Sure. Appreciate you asking. ReLaunchShow.com. Again, ReLaunchShow.com. Best place to get in touch with us. That's where we park all of our shows, and also some good resources, training material as well.
Fantastic. Joel, thank you very much for joining me.
Daniel, Jay, Lewis, thank you so much.
And I will have a link to that episode when I appeared on ReLaunch Show. And I'll give you this little tease, and it was a story that I have never shared anywhere else publicly. Some of my friends didn't even know the full story. And it was a story of complete failure in my life and how I did relaunch from that. So it was a great opportunity to share that on Joel's show, and he provided that great, safe environment. And so if you want to hear a huge failure from my life and how I recovered from that, and I'll give you this warning, it is overtly Christian. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable, then check out the episode. I have a link to it in the show notes. And as you know, my faith is very real to me, and I'm going to do a podcast episode very soon about faith in podcasting. But I've got my next guest here. Thank you, Jaime, for joining me.
Thank you so much.
First of all, what is your podcast?
My podcast is called Stop Riding the Pine. It's a sports analogy for get off the bench.
Nice.
Get in the game.
Yeah, and some people know me as having a joke. Is that a sports thing?
Yeah.
So what is the biggest lesson you've learned?
The biggest lesson I've learned is it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and taking that emotion of feeling uncomfortable, I think, makes it more authentic. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned, is just kind of go for it and, get in the game, so to speak.
Yeah. And we've got this interesting theme going on here of authenticity, of being uncomfortable, being vulnerable. And so have you learned that from listening or from podcasting yourself?
That's a good question. Both, actually, I think. In the beginning, it was from listening, and I learned to like different shows based on how it made me feel. And then when I finally got the courage and the guts to start my own show, that's probably where the real learning curve came in, because it was, it was me.
You really don't know how much you don't know until you start doing something. And then you discover, wow. But we all have to take that step at some point.
Exactly.
And not try to get that knowledge perfectly and put ourselves outside of our comfort zone.
Exactly, which you've done a fantastic job of, by the way.
Of putting myself outside my comfort zone?
Yeah, you get out there and you get it. It's fantastic. You bring a lot of people in. You're very authentic, and I hate that to sound so, what do you call it? I don't want to say cheesy or, but that's what you do. It's fantastic.
I love doing events like this, meeting people like you, and then having you on my podcast when we might not have ever had this chance to talk in the podcast, or my audience hear from you. And so, Jaime, tell us, where can we find your podcast?
You can find my podcast on iTunes. It's Stop Riding the Pine. And you can also find Podcast Professors on iTunes. We just launched that show. So,
great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Some people talk about having a podcast is a good way of being an introvert and yet reaching a global audience. And I think that is true. And yes, there are many different interpretations of what an introvert and extrovert is. I'm kind of like right in the middle, where I come to an event like this and I am charged. I am pumped up. But then when I'm away from an event like this, I'm content to be a loner and work just in my little office, quiet, all by myself. But I love the people here. I love getting to hear these stories. And please do check out the links to each of these podcasts that will be in the show notes for episode 230 at theaudacitypodcast.com/230. And my next guest is back.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining me back.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that phrase, I just feel like that's something that I've said before in my podcast. Thank you for joining me back, joining us back. That's in my comedy podcast. Actually, we've made fun of that phrase. But your name
is back, yeah. When your name is the English word, it's crazy. Yeah, sometimes I walk down the street and come back. I'm like, what? Who called me? Who called me?
And you play on that with the name of your podcast. Tell me your podcast.
My podcast is The Feedback.
Nice.
So The Feedback is about nightlife stories. I invite DJs and bartenders, anybody in the nightlife, artists, so they can share their insight on their nightlife experience. So it's an interview type kind of podcast, and I've always been fascinated by nightlife, and they became my friends when I moved to the U.S. from France. And so I was like, these guys, I wonder what it's like to be behind the bar and get to see all these people interact, and I find it fascinating. So
what's the biggest lesson you've learned from all of this?
My biggest lesson is that I always had this thing that my dad always told me. He always goes back, you have to articulate when you speak. And I always think faster than I speak, and I would stutter. I would start an idea and then backtrack, like, oh, wait, let me tell you. Oh, wait, hold on, I got to go back. And so doing the podcast, knowing that people are actually listening to me, knowing that I have to be careful about what I say, and I have to make sure that I say the right thing the first time, so that I don't have to repeat a question, so that people know exactly what my train of thought is, and I'm not backtracking, I'm not losing the audience, and I definitely don't want to lose my guest. So it really helps me structure my thoughts, structure my ideas, and when you have French in your head, and English, and my African language, trust me, it's a mess up there. And I have to organize all of that. And so podcasting has really helped me with that. So
that is awesome. And I think sometimes the fact that we have the ability to edit ourselves in podcasting can hurt us.
Yes.
Yes, there is the stuff about how well you can communicate in between your edits. It does come through in a podcast, and it doesn't come through in writing, because you can perfect that and hide any kind of edits in writing. But what's nice is to try to practice, and this is a good challenge, I think, for you out there. Practice not editing yourself and see how can you improve your presentation skill. Like you're saying back, and that's what you did, is you learned how to get it right the first time and not rely on editing. And as we sometimes say, live to drive or live to tape. It's a great challenge, and that's an awesome story that it's helped you in your regular communication.
Exactly, yes. It really has. It really has. So now when I talk about my podcast, what it's about, or when I just try to have a conversation with somebody. I love to debate with people. I love to get to know them. I love to know what they're about. And if I'm asking, 5 questions in one, I can totally lose them. So I got to make sure that whatever's coming out of my mouth makes sense and that it's structured so that it can follow what I'm saying. And I think that when I first started doing my podcast, they were not live. And I would just record, and then I would edit. I would tell my guests, I'm not editing any of this. And then I thought, let me do it live, see what it's like. I want to get people's reaction in real time when I'm talking. And that's on top of, hosting the show and making sure that, my guest understands. Now I have people listening right now as I'm speaking. It's additional pressure, but it's good practice anyway.
Yeah. So tell us, where can we get your podcast?
The Feedback, BAK, like my name, is on iTunes, it's on SoundCloud, it's on Stitcher also. You can check out thefeedback.com and, learn about nightlife and what people go through when they go out. Whether it's you just go out for a drink, whether you're an artist, you're a DJ, or everybody has stories. At the end of the day, everybody has stories. So that's what this is about.
Thank you very much back for joining me.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I got to say, this man has helped me so much. I started my podcast 1.5 years ago, and I learned a lot from Daniel J. Lewis. So thank you so much for everything you're doing, and keep doing your thing, man.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
I love it.
Thank you.
I'm not the only one, trust me. So many people.
Thank you. And I'll have the link to Back's show in the show notes for this episode, number 230 at theaudacitypodcast.com/230. it's people like back that I get to meet that have listened to my show. And this is what I love coming to these things. It's not an ego boost. It's a friendship boost. Getting to meet these people in person for the first time in forever. And getting to meet people that maybe I've never interacted with before. But hearing them say something like, oh, your podcast really helped me. And that's an awesome thing in podcasting, is that you're making a change. You're affecting people's lives. And when you go to an event where you have audience members, get ready to hear from people who tell you that and praise that. And that's the amazing thing with podcasting, is that you can influence someone's life. Joining me right now, Russ, thank you very much for joining me.
It's excellent time to be here, Daniel. It's so amazing. We're at Podcast Movement 2015 and, connected with so many people that I've been connected with online, and actually putting a face with a name and actually talking to them face to face. It's an exciting episode.
And Russ, you and I are in a mastermind group.
Absolutely.
That is led by our friend Joel that started the show off, my first guest.
Exactly. Fantastic. Congratulations on doing this show, too. It's this is kind of crazy, so it's thank you for inviting me in.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So where can people find you, or what is your show?
We are getting ready to launch the Future Media Association, which we're training business owners on words, images, audio, and video. And futuremediaassociation.com is where you can find us. And you can always track me down on Twitter and Google. Just search for Russ Johns, and I'll be around.
What's your biggest lesson that you've learned from podcasts, listening, or in getting into podcasts? Life lesson, business lesson, and just any kind of lesson. What's that biggest lesson that you are taking away, at least at the moment?
The biggest lesson that I've learned, Daniel, along this journey is start. Get started and reduce the, you're going to have a fear, whether it's, I don't like my voice, I don't like the process, I don't know how to do it, anything that is an obstacle in front of you, figure it out. That's the thing, is don't stop, keep moving, grab a hold of it, learn it, and understand what you can do. Simplify where you can, because there's, new technology coming out all the time. It's getting increasingly easy where you don't have to think about the technology. You just have to think about getting the story together and putting it out there.
That's what I love, and that's what I really want to see, the direction that we go with all of this technology. And that's why I'm in this business, is I want to make it easier for people like you or others to share their message and not have to worry about the technology.
It's not about the technology. It's about the story, about what's on your heart. What are you really passionate about? What are you looking forward to? And how you can share it. There's a message out there that is in your head, is trying to get out, and you just need to share it.
Yeah, that is wonderful. So tell us, once again, where can we find you on the internet?
Track us down at futuremediaassociation.com.
Great. Russ, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Daniel. Look forward to seeing you again.
Starting was the hardest part, I think, for anything, for many of us. And I've told my story before, so you can find other places where I've told this, but it was a couple people who directly or indirectly gave me the advice to just start. And one of them was Callie Lewis. That was indirectly. She just had a podcast episode and where she talked about podcasting. And her biggest advice was just start. Don't wait to get things perfectly. Just start. And the other person was Cliff Ravenscraft that I'd met around that same time because we live close together. And we went out for lunch because he was the only other podcaster I knew of in the Cincinnati area, and one of the very few people on Twitter at that time in the Cincinnati area. And his advice was the same thing, and it was just starting. Big lesson, hard one to learn as well. But I have another guest with me, and Stuart, thank you very much for joining me. Stuart McKay, what's your podcast?
My podcast is called Pocket Podcaster, and it actually, I started a year and a half ago, and it stalled, and I'm going to reboot it because it was a video podcast, but it's how to do your podcast soup to nuts with nothing but your iOS device. I've interviewed Sean here at the conference yesterday, talking about his product, because he talks about how to record and edit, but what he doesn't get into in his program is how to actually create your post, upload your file to your server, and all of that. So I'm developing and recording episodes right now to relaunch that show in the next month.
That will be great. I know a lot of people, either for the portability needs or just the simplicity needs, want something like that can I just record into my phone or my iPad or something? Do I have to get all this gear? So that's awesome that you're picking up on the other side of that and enabling them to publish, really.
Well, especially on the go. I do a lot of networking with small business owners that they're running from a networking meeting back to the office to do some work, and so maybe they can catch a 15-minute break while they're drinking their coffee, and so you can be sitting there at Starbucks drinking your coffee on your iPad or iOS device and editing audio in your earbuds and then uploading it using your broadband connection on your phone. You can be uploading it while you're driving back to the office, so you can really get the whole thing done. They say you can't really multitask, but something like that you really can, because it takes a second to render or to FTP something up, so you can do that right from your phone.
Yeah. And safety tip, start the upload before you get in the car.
Don't try to upload and keep checking the progress bar while you're driving.
Don't upload and drive. I've actually rendered videos while I was driving.
I've had
before.
my laptop on my passenger seat and rendered things.
Yeah. So we've both done
Crossing
that.
your fingers that the battery stays. Please don't buy.
So, Stuart, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from podcasts or podcasting?
Oh, my gosh. The biggest thing I've learned from podcasting is it's not a competition. The podcasting community is not a competition. You and the others in the Podcasters Roundtable, you would think on the outside, an outsider looking in, that you guys would be in competition with each other, but the sheer fact that you have the Podcasters Roundtable really shows that the community is very, very collaborative. And this conference itself, seeing different podcasters introduce each other and interact with each other, it's quite a warm community. And so not only in the podcasting community, but in my video production business, I've been now reaching out to other video producers in my area saying, hey, how's it going? What can I help you with? And being much more collaborative, not competitive.
That is good.
And I learned that from the podcasting community.
Yeah, we heard a keynote presentation here from Lou Mongello from WDW Radio, a great guy. He's won, I don't know how many awards now from the Podcast Awards. But he said that he was interviewed once, and someone asked him, who's your competition? And he said, I don't have any competition, which sounds like this really conceited answer. But it was what he was saying, like with you, is it's not about competition. It's about collaboration. That, yes, there are other people doing the same thing. That doesn't mean they're your competitors. That means they're your collaborators. I've learned a lesson like that similarly, too, with some of my friends who technically my competition.
Yeah. But
we collaborate. And so that's a great lesson. Tell me again, and tell us again, Stuart, where can we find your show?
Well, my show is The Pocket Podcaster, and it's at pocketpodcaster.com. And again, there are about 7 or 8 episodes from last year that are video-based episodes, but I'm relaunching an audio version in the next month.
That will be great, and I'll have the link for that in the show notes. Stuart, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate being able to be here.
You're very welcome. This has been great. My time is limited here, but I want to give a big thanks to Buzzsprout. And they didn't ask me to say this. I don't think they asked me, but I want to thank them anyway for setting up this great booth. It's a nice little sound booth that they've set up here at Podcast Movement where we could record the shows like this. And check out Buzzsprout. Go to the audacitytopodcast.com/Buzzsprout. They're a media hosting company, stats and providers. They even have a free plan where you can try to start out your podcast and you get limited amount of storage or limited number of recent episodes. It's a great way to just experiment and try it. And they have a beautiful interface. Some great things, too. Like they can give you stats to predict how many downloads your next episode will probably get and some other really cool things. So check it out at theaudacitytopodcast.com/Buzzsprout. I'm not getting paid to record this episode. They're providing this service here at Podcast Movement for free. So big thanks to the Buzzsprout team for providing this wonderful setup here. I'll try to post a picture of this in the show notes and get all of those links to everyone that was in the show at theaudacitytopodcast.com/230. My biggest lesson in this space is to learn the importance of creating something great. There have been times I've done other things in my life where I wanted to do it because I enjoyed it, but I didn't really focus on creating great art. I have a music composition background, and one of the things that you learn in music composition is to make something that resonates with people, connects with people musically, emotionally, that follows certain patterns. Just there are certain kind of rules of the universe, if you want to put it that way, of what makes something great. And greatness is open to definition of your own, as well as success. So what I've learned is focus on creating something great, and a lot of other things fall into place along the way. When I started the Audacity podcast, I just wanted to have a channel because I felt like I had something else to say, and I wanted to focus on creating great content. I did not plan to turn it into a business when I first started, but the response that I get from you and from other people about how the Audacity to podcast has helped you is just amazing. So thank you, and we are in this journey together. Check out everyone else who was here at theaudacitypodcast.com/230 and send me your feedback, questions for future episodes. All of the contact information is at theaudacitypodcast.com. I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to go launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. Thanks for listening. The Audacity Podcast is a proud member of Noodle Mix Network. Find more of our award-winning and award-nominated podcasts to make you think, laugh, and succeed at noodle.mx. The Audacity Podcast is also